The sow cost $2 from the back of a stock truck at the Kiowa County dispersal sale on a Friday morning in October of 1933. And she cost $2 because she was the wrong color, the wrong shape, and by every appearance, the wrong investment for anyone standing at that truck gate. Odalise Fenwick had come to the sale for a used grain auger and a coil of hog wire, both of which she found before 10 o'clock at prices she could carry against the $11 in the household tin. She was walking the wire back toward her truck when the man at the gate called out that he had one more animal to move before he left, a sow he'd hauled down from a dispersal outside of Pratt because the estate wanted the whole lot gone in a single day. Nobody had bid on her. She was a strange rust-red color, long-bodied, with ears that fell forward over her eyes instead of standing up the way a decent hog's ears were supposed to, and she was thin in the way that made men at a sale look for the reason before they looked at anything else. Odalise looked at the reason first, out of habit, and did not find one. The sow was thin because whoever had been feeding the herd she came from had run out of money to feed her properly, not because there was anything wrong in her. Her spine didn't show sway, her legs were straight and set well under her, not the bowed, overloaded legs of an animal carrying more weight than her frame could manage. Her snout was long and her body was long behind it, deep through the chest, and when she moved to the front of the pen to see who was looking at her, she moved with an economy that Odalise's father would have called good bone, animals that were built right underneath whatever condition they happened to be in. "What is she?" Odalise asked. The man at the gate shrugged. "Tamworth, the estate paper says. English breed. Can't sell 'em around here. County wants a hog that finishes fat and white. $2 and she's yours, or she goes back on the truck to the renderer in Pratt." Odalise had $11 against a winter that had already taken the wheat crop down to nothing worth cutting, $4 of which needed to become seed money by March, and a father's ledger in the house that had not shown a profit line in 2 years. She should have walked back to the truck with her wire and her auger and let the sow go to Pratt. She thought about the long body and the straight legs and the particular economy of that movement, and she paid the $2. She had not planned on a hog. She had been thinking since the wheat came in short in August about the Herefords she couldn't afford to expand and the chickens that were already doing what chickens could do and not much more. And she had not been thinking about pigs at all because the county ran commercial white hogs, the fast-finishing kind that packing plants wanted, and Odalise had neither the corn nor the capital to compete on that ground. But she had read in the one issue of a farm journal that had come to the house secondhand from her cousin in Wichita, an article about the English bacon breeds, animals bred over centuries not for fast fat, but for length of body and depth of muscle along the loin and belly, the specific conformation that produced the kind of cured meat a certain trade paid well above commodity hog prices to get. She had read it in January with no particular hog in mind. She had not expected to be standing at a stock truck in October with the answer to that article looking back at her through a curtain of forward-set ears. She named her Clover, for no reason she could have defended if asked, and hauled her home in the truck bed on a bed of straw meant for the auger, and put her in the empty end stall of the barn that had held nothing since her father's mule died the winter before. The county's opinion of the purchase formed before she'd finished unloading. She knew this because Hollis Byrne had been at the feed store when the sale broke up, and what Hollis Byrne saw at a stock sale by 10 in the morning was county knowledge by supper, the specific efficiency of small communities that had nothing else that week to discuss with any enthusiasm. Emmett Larkin was at the shared fence line the following Tuesday. He farmed the 80 acres to the north, mostly wheat and a small commercial hog operation he ran on contract with a packer out of Wichita, and he had been at that fence with a reason connected to the shared stock pond roughly twice a week since the spring her father died, a reason that had stopped needing much attention from either of them sometime around midsummer without either of them saying so. "Heard you bought a sow at the McCrory sale," he said. "I did," Odalise said. "Heard she's an English breed, red, long body, ears down over her eyes." "Tamworth," Odalise said. "Bacon breed." Emmett looked past her toward the barn, where Clover's rust-red back was visible over the stall boards. $2, he said, in the particular tone of a man repeating a number back so its owner could hear how it sounded out loud. $2, she said. He was quiet for a moment. the specific quiet of a man who ran commercial white hogs on contract and understood exactly what a packing plant would offer for a long, thin-fatted red sow that didn't finish the way the contract wanted. "Packer won't take her," he said. "Not for what you'd want out of her." "I know," Odalys said. "I'm not selling her to a packer." He looked at her, and something in his face went through the specific recalibration of a man revising a private assessment without saying so out loud. And then he went back to his side of the fence and did not say anything else about it that week. Clover put on weight through November and December the way an animal does when she is finally being fed to a level that matches what her body was built to use, steadily, without the fast, unhealthy bloom of a commercial hog pushed on corn alone. Odalys fed her the household scraps and the skim left from what little cream she sold, and the fall garden waste, and, when she could spare it, a measured ration of ground grain, and she kept the notebook her father had used for the cattle and started a new page for the sow, weight estimated by tape measurement across the heart girth every 2 weeks, condition noted, temperament noted. Clover was calm in a way that surprised her, unbothered by the barn cats, curious about the chickens, willing to be scratched behind the forward-falling ears in a manner Odalys had not expected from a $2 sale animal nobody else had wanted. In January, she bred Clover to a boar she located through a letter to the State Agricultural Extension Office in Manhattan, a 2-day drive she couldn't make herself but arranged through a hauler out of Pratt, who was already making the trip for another farmer's stock. At a cost of $3 she took out of the seed money and did not tell anyone about, including, for the first several weeks, Emmett. Tamworth gestation ran close to 114 days, and she marked the date on the calendar nailed inside the barn door and began counting forward toward May. The extension office wrote back within the month, a formal letter on letterhead, confirming the breeding arrangement and adding a paragraph she read 3 times before she understood why it mattered. The Tamworth was among the oldest recognized swine breeds in England, the letter said, developed in Staffordshire over more than a century specifically for bacon curing rather than fresh pork, prized by British curers for a leanness through the belly and a depth of color in the lean that fatter, faster-finishing breeds could not produce. American demand had never been large, the letter noted, because American packing plants had spent 30 years breeding toward exactly the opposite qualities, hogs that finished fast on corn and dressed out heavy and white. Which meant, though the extension officer had not written it in so many words, that a farm willing to raise the old breed correctly and cure it properly was standing in a gap the commercial industry had walked away from and had no intention of walking back into. Odalys read that letter at the kitchen table with the lamp turned up and understood for the first time the actual shape of what she'd bought for $2. It was not a strange-colored hog. It was access to a market that had been sitting empty in plain sight of every commercial hogman in 3 counties, unclaimed because none of them were positioned to claim it. Before we find out what Odalys builds from a $2 sow nobody else wanted, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. This channel reaches people from all across the country, and we love knowing where these stories land. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now. New stories every week. The letter from the extension office confirming the breeding cross arrived the same week Emmett showed up at her door instead of the fence, which she noted without commenting on it. The seed money, he said. He was standing on her porch with his hat in his hand, and the specific stillness of a man who had done arithmetic he didn't love and had come to say so anyway. $3 of it went to a boar in Manhattan. "It did," she said. "You didn't tell me." "I didn't ask you," she said. "It wasn't your seed money." He was quiet a moment, and something in his jaw worked the way it worked when he was choosing not to say the next thing that had occurred to him. "The bacon trade," he said instead. "You'd need a smokehouse, a real one, not the shed you've got." "I know," she said. "I've got cedar from the windbreak my father cut in '29 and never used," he said. "It's been drying in my barn for 4 years doing nothing." She looked at him. "That's not a small thing to offer." "I'm not offering it small," he said, and went back to his side of the fence, and came back the following Saturday with a wagon load of cedar boards and built her a smokehouse over 2 weekends without being asked twice, the specific quality of help that arrived accurate and complete and required no further conversation to be understood for what it was. Clover farrowed on the 11th of May, 9 piglets, all but one of them carrying the rust-red coat and the long body and the forward-falling ears that marked them unmistakably as their dams. Odalave sat up 2 nights running in the straw of the end stall with a lantern and a notebook, the way her father had taught her to sit up with a difficult calving, though this birth needed none of that difficulty. Clover delivered the litter herself, competently, in the particular unhurried way Odalave had come to understand was simply the Tamworth temperament, an animal bred for centuries to farrow outdoors without assistance, and raise what she farrowed without losing any of it. All 9 piglets survived the first critical week, which the county's commercial hogmen would have told her, if she'd asked, was an unusually high number for a first litter from any sow, purebred or not. She raised the litter through the summer on pasture and skim milk and the garden's overflow, watching the frame lengthen the way the journal article had described, watching the depth come into the chest and the loin extend the way a bacon hog was supposed to extend and a commercial white hog was not built to. By August, the young hogs were moving through the pasture with the same economical, straight-legged gait their mother carried, rooting through the turned soil behind the garden with the particular vigor Tamworths were known for, an old, hardy breed that did well outdoors in weather that would have stressed a barn-raised commercial animal past productive condition. The county's practical objections arrived that same August, delivered mostly through Hollis Byrne at the feed store. A red hog wouldn't dress out to the weight buyers wanted, he told anyone who asked and several who didn't. The commercial packer paid by the pound on the hoof, and a long-bodied bacon breed carried less weight for its frame than a fat commercial hog, which meant in Hollis's arithmetic that Odalis had bred herself an inefficient animal on purpose. He wasn't wrong about the pounds. He was wrong about the arithmetic that mattered, because he was pricing the hog the way the packer priced it, by weight alone, and Odalis was not selling to the packer. She was selling cured meat by the pound at a price that had nothing to do with what a live animal weighed crossing a scale. She did not argue the point at the feed store. She let the smokehouse make the argument instead, on a longer timeline than any conversation could manage. She slaughtered the first hog in October, a full year almost to the week since she'd paid $2 for its mother, and she cured the meat in Emmett's smokehouse using a method she'd found in a second borrowed farm journal, a slow, cold smoke over hickory and applewood that took the better part of 3 weeks and could not be hurried without ruining the result. The temperature had to stay low enough that the meat cured rather than cooked, which meant tending the fire in careful, small increments morning and evening for the full 3 weeks, a discipline that rewarded patience and punished shortcuts without mercy. The bacon that came out of that smokehouse was not the pale, wet, fast-cured product the county was used to from the commercial packers plant. It was dense, dark red through the lean, marbled through the fat in a way that held together in the pan instead of shrinking to nothing. And it tasted, when she finally sliced a piece for herself at the kitchen table on a cold evening in late October, like something she had not had reason to taste since before her father's ledger stopped showing profit. She slaughtered the first hog in October, a full year almost to the week since she'd paid $2 for its mother, and she cured the meat in Emmett's smokehouse using a method she'd found in a second borrowed farm journal, a slow, cold smoke over hickory and applewood that took the better part of 3 weeks and could not be hurried without ruining the result. The bacon that came out of that smokehouse was not the pale, wet, fast-cured product the county was used to from the commercial packers plant. It was dense, dark red through the lean, marbled through the fat in a way that held together in the pan instead of shrinking to nothing. And it tasted, when she finally sliced a piece for herself at the kitchen table on a cold evening in late October, like something she had not had reason to taste since before her father's ledger stopped showing profit. We're halfway through this story, and we want to know, have you ever raised or tasted a heritage breed hog, the old kind, not the commercial sort? Tell us in the comments. We read every one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is your reminder, new stories every week. She took 6 pounds of it to Delphine Achor at the general store the following Monday, sliced thin and wrapped in paper, the way she'd once seen a Kansas City butcher's counter photograph laid out in a magazine. Delphine fried a strip on the little stove she kept behind the counter for coffee, the way she tested anything a farm wife brought her before she'd agree to sell it. And she was quiet for a long moment with the fork still in her hand. "Where did this come from?" she said. "My hog," Odalise said. "Tamworth. Bacon breed. I've had bacon out of Fenton's packing plant for 20 years, Delphine said. This isn't that. No, Odalise said. It isn't. Delphine looked at the 6 pounds on the counter, then at Odalise, then went into the back room and came out with a ledger of her own. I've got a standing order from the Wichita Hotel Supply that Fenton can't fill half the time because his hogs finish too fat and too wet for what the chef wants, she said. He's been asking me for 2 years if anybody in this county raises the Old English breeds. I told him nobody did. She looked at the bacon again. I was wrong. The price Delphine named was 32 cents a pound for cured bacon against the 11 cents a pound the commercial packer was paying that same October for live hogs off the truck. And when Odalise did the arithmetic that evening at the kitchen table, the difference wasn't a rounding error. It was the difference between a farm that survived a winter and a farm that began, for the first time since her father's ledger went red, to build towards something past survival. She did not sell the breeding stock. That decision she made once, clearly, the same week Delphine placed her first order, and she held to it without revisiting it. Clover and the 2 gilts she kept back from the litter were the operation now, the foundation of every future litter and every future smokehouse run. And a sow that produced income year after year through what she raised was worth infinitely more standing in a pasture than she would ever be worth crossing a scale at a single sale. What she sold was the cured meat, and only the cured meat, litter after litter, season after season. And she said this once to Emmett at the fence in November, when he asked whether she'd consider a fair offer he'd heard was circulating from a buyer over in Pratt, and she never had to say it again, because he never asked a second time. By the following spring, Clover had farrowed a second litter, 11 piglets this time, and the 2 gilts from the first litter were old enough to breed themselves, and Odalise was running the numbers on a scale that would have seemed impossible to the woman who'd counted $11 in a tin the previous October. 3 sows meant 3 litters a year, assuming she staggered the breeding correctly, which meant close to 30 piglets raised to slaughter weight annually if she lost none to the ordinary hazards of livestock, and 30 hogs cured properly in a smokehouse built from cedar that had sat idle in a neighbor's barn for 4 years, meant a bacon operation that could supply not only Delphine's counter, but the Wichita hotel trade directly, if she could arrange the hauling. Emmett arranged the hauling. He knew a man who ran a truck route between Pratt and Wichita twice monthly for grain deliveries, who had room in the bed for cured meat crated properly, and by that summer, Odalise was shipping to the hotel supply account directly, cutting out Delphine's margin on the wholesale portion while keeping the general store stocked for local trade, an arrangement Delphine herself suggested once she understood what the volume was going to become. The county's opinion of the $2 sow had revised itself by degrees through that second year, the way county opinions did, not through any single announcement, but through the accumulation of small evidence that was harder to argue with each season it repeated. Hollis Byrne, who had told anyone who'd listen in October of 1933 that Odalise Fenwick had thrown $2 away on a hog too ugly for the renderer to want, stopped saying so sometime around the second smokehouse run, and by the third litter had taken to mentioning, when asked, that he'd always thought there was something in that long-bodied red sow. A revision of memory Odalise noted in her ledger margin, without comment, because arguing with a man's revised recollection of his own good judgment cost more than it was worth and settled nothing that the ledger itself hadn't already settled. Emmett came to the door instead of the fence on a Saturday evening in September, the cedar smokehouse 2 years old by then, and blackened properly with the patina of steady use, the third litter's meat hanging in its smoke, and he stood on the porch the way he'd stood there the day he confessed to knowing about the boar in Manhattan, hat in hand, a man who had learned over 2 years that the direct way through a thing was generally the fastest. The operation, he said, it's outgrown what one smokehouse can hold. I know, she said. I've got the North 40 doing nothing but wheat that barely clears its own seed cost most years, he said. Good pasture underneath it if the wheat came out. She looked at him. That's not a small thing to offer either. I've been offering things 2 years running, he said. I've noticed you take them seriously when they're not offered small. I take most things seriously, she said. I've noticed that too, he said. And something in his face did the thing it had been building toward doing since the cedar boards first came off his wagon. an expression that was not quite a question and not quite a statement, sitting in the specific space between the two that both of them had been circling for the better part of 2 years without either one naming it. "Come to supper," she said. "Sunday. Bring the pasture numbers for the North 40, and we'll see what a second smokehouse actually requires before either of us decides anything past that." "Sunday," he said, and the corner of his mouth did something it did rarely and always briefly, and he went back across the fence that no longer needed a pretext to cross. By the following autumn, the Fenwick operation ran 4 sows, 2 smokehouses, and a standing account with the Wichita hotel trade that Delphine had helped broker into 2 more accounts once the first proved reliable. And Odalus stood in the pasture on a cold October morning, almost exactly 3 years from the Friday she'd paid $2 for a rust-red sow nobody else wanted, watching the current litter root through the turned soil behind the garden with the same economical, straight-legged movement their grandmother had carried off a stock truck in a year when $11 in a tin had been the entire distance between the farm and nothing. Clover was old now, past her most productive years, kept on not for what she'd produce going forward, but for what she'd already built. A decision Odalus had made the same way she'd made the decision never to sell her, once, clearly, and never revisited. Emmett was at the fence line that no longer separated 2 operations, so much as marked where one continuous piece of ground began to be worked by 2 people who had stopped needing a shared stock pond as their reason for standing there together. She had $11 in a tin the October she bought Clover. She did not remember, standing in that pasture 3 years later, exactly what she had thought the $2 would become. She remembered only that she had looked at a thin, wrong-colored sow with her ears down over her eyes, and had seen the long body and the straight legs underneath the condition, and had trusted what she saw over what everyone else at that stock truck had decided without looking closely enough to see it at all. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you. Leave a comment below. What's the most unlikely thing you've ever seen someone build from an animal nobody else wanted? Your stories are what makes this community what it is. Subscribe if you haven't already. We'll have a new story for you next week.